The differences between a print portfolio and a web portfolio. One would think these would be ginormous because print is print and web is digital. However, there's a lot of relationships between the two. When you are designing for the web, building your online portfolio, there are some absolute musts that you have to be aware of and be considerate of. So the first is in designing for the screen. You have to respect the format. Now, typical old school, it was a horizontal format. We used to design 1024 by 768 and all was good. The old rule was that we shouldn't scroll. Our pages can scroll on the web. Obviously, this is different than in print, and it's okay to scroll. However, we still go with the theory of what's called above the fold. This is a very important content theory, and it really shows that content that is above the fold generally fares better. And so this is an old newspaper term. It was done in newspaper design. Above the fold indicates the area that appears in the browser window when the page is initially open without having to scroll. Comes from newspapers. When you would buy a newspaper at a newspaper stand or in one of those newspaper little machines, you would see only what was above the fold. So in newspapers, the editors would put the most important story with a really large picture right there above the fold to draw people in to then purchase that newspaper. So the same theory really holds true on the web, that usually when content is above the fold, people are going to see it. A lot of people just simply don't scroll, whether they know or not. If they can scroll, they might not realize that there's a scroll. But some people just initially look. First impression, what comes to them, and that's what they see. So now when we talk about moving into the mobile environment and utilizing mobile devices, huge percentages of people are only viewing web content on their mobile device, whether it be their tablet or their phone, whatever it is. So there is a viable solution to lock the dimensions of the content so they don't change. And this is more applicable towards the computer, where you might want to say, okay, this is the width, and in all browsers, if it changes or not, it's just going to be centered right there and I can control it. Now, this is bad for mobile devices, not a good solution for that. So we want to have fluid layouts. We want to watch our limits, carefully set those limits, and go more towards a responsive design. Look at putting percentages on our content, and so then it takes up a percentage of the viewer's browser window. This might be a good time to connect with a content expert, connect with a programmer who understands responsive design. The next piece here is the indication of how many. So we need to show an awareness of our viewers' understanding of how many there are. So it shows good design awareness to anticipate the concerns of the viewer by providing an indication of how many images there are to view in a given set or a given module, a given content area. So in a book, we have a pretty good understanding of how many pages are left. When we're going through a print portfolio, we can kind of tell we're about halfway, or we're just about to the end. When you're online and you just have a next or a previous button, you might not know how many are there. And it shows that people typically will just click a few and then they abort it because they're not going to sit and click through a bunch of images. So you want to indicate the total number of images and exactly which image you are currently viewing. If you do this, people are more inclined to click through all the images if they know how many are there. So if you don't, like I mentioned, they only click through the first few. So if you have something like 3 of 7, you're viewing number 3 of a total of 7. If I were to give you one where, one of 200, I really highly doubt someone's going to click through all 200, and they know that. So they might click through the first few and say, okay, seen enough, done. We also need to be aware of our user and situation awareness. Our user should always know where they are at in your site, and they need to know exactly how to get back to any other part of the site. This is like the rule number one in usability, in interface usability design. People need to know where they are and how they can get back. Typography. Some think that typography is only important in a print environment, but it is super important in the digital environment and probably is worthy of more attention actually in the digital environment. So you need to have attention to details in typography. This attention is extremely important. So you can manipulate line spacing, word spacing, character size, and all those other design elements. And the attention to these details, like I said, super, super important. We have to think about our fonts. So is it only acceptable to use screen fonts? Do I have to stick with Georgia, Verdana, or can I wander away a bit? So the whole typography issue on the web has really changed because we can use some different tools and techniques to play with more interesting fonts. We're not stuck with just the default that the browser offers us. It's still a good idea, however, to use those screen-friendly fonts for point sizes of 12 and under. Also need to think about in your typography color and the contrast that you may be achieving with color. We need to think about legibility and readability. So here goes the typography lesson. We know that a stark color contrast, like the black on white, a reversal, can really affect readability. We get that dazzle effect, if you remember that, when we have white on black. So you have to be cautious of your color contrast and what you're trying to do. Think about readability and usability. And if it's in question, this should be something that you test in your usability testing, in your product testing. You should specifically target the typography. Ask questions. Get reviews. Is it working? Can people read it? Is it uncomfortable if people read it? Will they not read it because it looks too hard to read? So those are considerations you have to think about. So even though we think the differences between print and web are very, very big, they really aren't. Typography is just as important, if not more, in web than as it is in print. Situation awareness, the indication of how many things that we have to include in our web portfolio that maybe we forget about in print. And then, of course, the overall design, designing for a screen rather than a printed page. Thinking of how, again, our usability is such a big key in this, how our users are responding to our designs, and if they're going to view it on a mobile platform, how can we make sure our portfolio is going to look good? Because I can guarantee you, if someone pulls up your portfolio on their phone and it looks like crap, they're going to say, nope, and this person's out. And you're done. So all of these things are very, very important to consider.